Hi, I'm Gordon from Camera Labs, and this is my initial first looks review of the Canon RF 200 to 800mm f6.3-9 IS USM, a super telephoto zoom for the EOS R mirrorless system that's corrected for full-frame bodies. I got my hands on a pre-production model for this video, and I'll show you what I know so far. Announced in November 2023, it becomes the world's first full-frame super telephoto zoom to reach 800mm, making it ideal for distant wildlife and sports. It costs around £2,300 at launch, but check the description for links to the latest and US pricing. The 200 to 800 becomes the third super telephoto zoom in the RF system to date, joining the cheaper 100 to 400 f5.6 to 8 and the more expensive 100 to 500 f4.5 to 7.1L. Unsurprisingly, the 200 to 800 is by far the heftiest of the three, roughly double the length and 3 times the weight of the 100 to 400, not to mention 50% longer and half a kilo heavier than the 100 to 500. This is a big lens. It also joins a selection of long primes, including the RF 800mm f11, which may be similar in diameter, but in its retracted state is 32mm shorter, and more importantly, roughly 2/3 the weight and half the price. That said, the 800 f11 prime is 2/3 of a stop dimmer in aperture and lacks a zoom capability, but it's nice to have the choice. From left to right, here's the RF 100 to 400, the RF 100 to 500, the RF 600 and 800mm primes, and finally the latest RF 200 to 800 on the far right. At this point, I'd normally mention third-party options like Sigma's 150 to 600 f5 to 6.3 DGDN, actually similar in weight to the 200 to 800 despite not reaching as far, but again actually costing around half the price. Sadly, at the time of making this review though, Sigma's native mirrorless lenses were still not an option for Canon EOS R, so I'll keep my fingers crossed, remind you that you could always adapt an older EF version, and for this review, move on. Measuring 102mm in diameter, 314mm long, and weighing just over 2 kilograms, the RF 200 to 800 is certainly a lens that you know you're carrying around. Reflecting the size and weight, Canon has thankfully fitted a tripod foot with a collar that allows the lens to rotate, albeit lacking any notches to easily find 90-degree intervals. The foot is non-removable, thereby occupying even more bag space, but you can at least use it as a carrying handle. With its white barrel, you may assume the 200 to 800 is a member of the high-end L series, but actually it's not. There's no red ring here. But before you get too concerned over build and accessories for the typical environments where this lens is going to find itself, the 200 to 800 is sealed against what Canon describes as light weather conditions, and also thankfully comes with a lens hood and a strap too. As for filters, there's a 95mm thread at the end of the barrel. In terms of controls, there's a combined manual focus and control ring, 2 AF stop buttons with a customizable function, switches for autofocus and IS, followed by a ring to adjust the resistance of the main zoom ring itself. The closest focusing distance varies by focal length, starting at 80cm at the 200mm end, before extending to 1.8 meters at 400mm, 2.8 meters at 600mm, and finally 3.3 meters when zoomed to the 800mm focal length. Note that unlike the 100 to 500, there's no focus distance limiter switch, nor any panning image stabilization modes to choose from. Twisting the zoom ring extends the barrel like most lenses in its class, including the 100 to 400 and 100 to 500, not to mention Sigma's 150 to 600. Sony's FE200-600 is the exception here, zooming internally. As you increase the focal length, the aperture gradually dims, again like most super tele zooms. The 200 to 800 starts with a maximum aperture of f6.3 at 200mm, before dimming to f7.1 at 268mm, then to f8 at 455mm, before operating at f9 between 637 and 800mm. Now, a maximum aperture of f6.3 to f9 is never going to deliver super shallow depth of field effects or be the best spec in very low light, but you can see here what you can expect at 200mm f6.3 as the subject gets closer to the lens. Ultimately, the 200 to 800's aperture was chosen to make it lighter and more affordable than Canon's larger aperture super teles. Think of it as a zoomable and slightly brighter version of the 800 f11 and you'll be on the right track, and that particular lens has proven a hit not just on price but portability. Not everybody can afford or wants to lug around a 600 f4 or 800 5.6, but if you do, these are already available in the RF catalogue. Focusing is courtesy of a nano USM motor, and the lens also includes optical image stabilization, good for up to 5.5 stops on bodies without IBIS, or up to 7.5 stops for those that do. No, IBIS becomes less effective at very long focal lengths though, so the enhanced stabilization only applies when the lens is nearer to the 200mm end. Once you reach the 800mm end, it effectively uses optical stabilization only, so you've got the 5.5 stops of compensation regardless of the body you mount it on. And for anyone who finds 800mm not quite long enough, I'm delighted to report the 200 to 800 is fully compatible with both the 1.4 and 2 times RF teleconverters, extending the reach up to a possible 1600mm, albeit with a correspondingly dim aperture of f/18. But resist the temptation to think about DSLR performance. These are designed for mirrorless cameras, and amazingly the EOS R bodies will still autofocus at this point, but with a slightly reduced area of 90 by 100% when using the 1.4 times teleconverter, or 40 by 60% when using the 2 times converter. You can see the size of the AF area here on a full frame EOS R5 when using the 2 times teleconverter, so your subject will need to be inside here for autofocus. When using a 1.4 TC though, it effectively focuses across almost the entire frame. Alternatively, if you're using a crop body, like the EOS R7 for even greater reach, these reductions become less of an issue. You're looking at the 200 to 800 with a 2 times teleconverter on the EOS R7 here, where the grey box represents the autofocusing area, now representing a slightly larger 60 by 80% portion of the frame. Oh, and unlike using teleconverters on the 100 to 500, there's no restrictions to the range. You can use them anywhere between 200 and 800mm. Now, once I get my hands on the final production sample of the lens, I'll add sample images to my review page at cameralabs.com before following up with a full video testing and comparing the quality and overall performance. Right now though, the RF 200 to 800 looks like a very promising addition to the growing RF catalogue for those who desire long reach without sacrificing the flexibility of a zoom. It's also a long-awaited response to Sony's 200 to 600mm, which for a long time has been a reason for some people to adopt that system. Let me know what you think in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.